Hello and welcome. This is founder Laerun with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to go over some of the options that you can have for creating content for Fantasy Grounds using the ChatGPT text model for AI. This is the OpenAI website. Links will be in the description after the video. And the audio today is brought to us by Monument Studios. They've been kind enough to share some of their content with us, and they've also just launched on New Year's Day. So if you're interested in adding any RPG audio to your tabletop or to your face-to-face games or digital games, this is another option. Their chat player is pretty decent. It's pretty basic. It's fairly easy to set up, not very intensive on your system. And it does a pretty good job at what it does. You can also set it up in OBS if you want. So anyways, without further ado, let's get into the content. So I'd like to first mention that I've just started using OpenAI for creating content. I've actually come a long way since I first started. Yesterday we had a guest, the guy that actually introduced us to some of the concepts of AI. And he was really kind enough to go on the show with me, and we kind of did a part one. I'm going to use part two, kind of get a little bit more into the Fantasy Grounds part of things. I want to actually bring up the OpenAI website, so I'm just going to go ahead and click over to that. I'm actually signed in. I have an account here. So on the left-hand side are all the different chat topics that I have set up for this particular application. So I have some XML code for Fantasy Grounds. I have a stat block conversation. I use basically the conversations as topics or subjects so that the topics don't get too convoluted with different information. You can do it all in one topic or one chat, but it's better if you kind of compartmentalize it. And that way you use each conversation for the type of content you're going to create. So for example, I'm going to write D&D 5e NPC stat blocks. So this is kind of my conversation on that. I actually asked the API on the AI to basically to explain to me what the stat blocks are, and it actually knew that. So I was able to ask it, do you know the template, or do you know the format, the actual official format for a D&D 5e stat block? And it was able to do that. The other thing I've done is I went to the Fantasy Grounds forums and I took the D&D 5e parsing information. So this is the template for the actual type of text that Fantasy Grounds likes to see. So when it parses or when it looks at that text, it actually creates useful content. So I actually went in and defined the NPCs, and then I also did character stuff. So if you wanted to build a new class, for instance, you could. So I actually gave it that information just in case. It actually pulls from the internet all the way. I mean, it goes back quite a ways. They fed this thing several petaflops of the internet all the way back to who knows when, up to current 2021. Then they kind of pulled back on it, and they've had to change it because people were using it for nefarious reasons. But nonetheless, it does a pretty good job with text, and you can make tables and all kinds of interesting things. So what I've done here is given it all of the main parameters for weapon attacks, for damage types, saving throws, conditions, ongoing damage, like damage resistance, immunities, traits, all these sorts of things that go into creating NPCs in Fantasy Grounds. I even gave it the spellcasting trait, recharge, and then it actually goes on to explain a little bit how this stuff works in its own words, which is amazing. So it took whatever I did and added to it, and it just came out with this really, really interesting thing. So I asked it to create a race based on these notes that I've given it. And I don't see where I actually pasted that, but maybe I did. But this was the NPC parsing data template for NPCs. So what I'm going to do, I think, is bring up a document that is floating around in our community. It's also freely available on the actual forums. If you look for the actual parsing data or the actual text format that Fantasy Grounds likes to recognize, at least for the D&D 5e rule set. You can do that on the forums, or if you have to, you can come into Fantasy Grounds Academy, and I can send it to you if you want. This is Laerun from the Fantasy Grounds Academy. You need to know in Discord. So essentially, I'm going to pull up the documents that I used early on to help train our faculty and our volunteers to, the types of things that that we need to know to help people in the community. So I'm going to open up a PDF document that was put together by the community, and it's really it doesn't cost anything. This is free. So essentially, these are all of the different PC options for player characters. So what I'm going to do is take this and plug it into AI and ask it to generate a new class or a new race or whatever it is that I want to put into Fantasy Grounds. I don't even think I need to do this, but I'm going to do it for good measure, because when I ask it to do something, I'm going to have it draw upon this information so that it kind of has an idea. It has context for what it's creating. So I'm just going to hit Control-A to select all the text, and then Control-Copy or Control-C, and then I'm going to go back to the AI program or the app, and I'm going to plug this in, and I'm just going to hit Control-V, and this is going to put all that text in there that has the actual context for the Fantasy Grounds format. And this is kind of important because you want useful information. Otherwise, it's just another tool that's going to generate useless text. So you don't want that. And you have to hit Shift and Enter if you want to create a new line, because if you hit Enter, it will actually start generating. So you don't want to necessarily generate right away. So what I'm going to do is take and define what this is, or at least try to tell the system or the AI what this is. So I'm going to say character, and this is for a reference tag. This isn't anything official. So character creation, I'll say Fantasy Grounds. Let me put that in there. Fantasy Grounds character creation. I'll say parsing template. And I kind of made that kind of wordy, but this is what it is, essentially. And then you have all the different sections like feats, and you have your ability score callouts, and a feat giving proficiency, weapon proficiency. So these are all statements that are for Fantasy Grounds that actually get used by the engine or the back end of Fantasy Grounds to identify different types of text. If you don't have the context or the correct text for Fantasy Grounds, you have to kind of massage it and work it out before you actually are able to use Fantasy Grounds. But in this case, I'm defining some of this in the AI itself so that it actually knows how to format the wording. So this is one of the things that I did myself to train it. I may not even have needed it, but I wanted to make sure that it understood the Fantasy Grounds requirements, because it will give you the official D&D 5e formatting, but it may or may not know all the little particulars of Fantasy Grounds. So that's why I put that in there that way. It may not even have needed. I might have just made more work for myself, but nonetheless, I think this is a good step in the right direction in training this app or this program or AI how to do things in Fantasy Grounds. So that's kind of what I've done in the beginning, is kind of train it, say, okay, let's give it all this stuff first, and then name it. And then once it knows that, or once it'll remember this conversation, and it's really not even a conversation. I'm just giving it data and telling it what the stuff is, defining it essentially. And then when I ask it to create something, it's going to pull on this and say, oh, okay, it's going to know the format. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. This is important for parsing information. I don't know how it works for other rule sets. I don't know what the available documentation or the examples are, but I'm pretty sure that the Fantasy Grounds forums, if you go into a rule set, there'll be lots of examples. And you can plug those examples in and making the fact that it will take in those and account for them, so that when you're trying to generate content with a specific rule set, it'll give you some actual useful data and not just its own variation of that. So that's something you may want to look into. But this is a D&D rule set. It's pretty common. There's a lot of documentation, and it kind of already knows like what is what in regards to formatting. I actually ask it to create stuff with the official D&D 5e content formatting so that it actually comes out correctly. So I went ahead and fixed that, and now I'm going to say, I'm going to tell it really, I'm going to say the above data is the official Fantasy Grounds formatting data for parsing into Fantasy Grounds. So I'm just kind of giving it this information, and I don't expect it to give me anything right now, but I'm going to go ahead and hit, I'm going to go ahead and send it forward. It's not going to really know what to do with it, but it will essentially know how to create stuff. So now what I've asked it to do is generate a D&D 5e race called the Sand Folk, and they have the ability to withstand. So what this is doing is generating something that I had asked it previously, and it's kind of writing itself its own thing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from scratch, and I'm going to ask it to write a D&D 5e race, or even an NPC, or whatever you want it to be. So in this case, let's do a race. So I'm going to ask it to make that. So I'm just going to basically word it that way. I'm going to say generate a random, I'll say ocean themed race using the official Fantasy Grounds race data. You don't have to be specific either. It knows what you're saying. It's strange, but essentially it kind of knows what you're getting at. So generate a random ocean themed race using the official Fantasy Grounds race data and the official D&D 5e race format, which is going to change in the future, but for right now this should work. So I'm asking it to generate a random but themed race that's based in the ocean, or some kind of oceanic. So generate a random, I'll say oceanic instead of ocean, oceanic themed, I'll say player race, because I want to be a little bit more specific, using the official Fantasy Grounds race data template and the official D&D 5e race format, which it probably pulls off the internet from the SRD. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this go for it button here, which is go. So Oceanids is what it calls this, are a race of human beings with deep connection to the sea. They are native to the oceans and are rarely seen on land, but they do emerge from the waves. They are a sight to behold. So it's already given me the ability score increases, the size, the speed at which they can walk or swim. It's giving it the amphibious trait. They have oceanic-based magic. They have some kind of thing called tidal surge, and it gives you some kind of damage, and then the languages that they start with. So this can essentially be plugged into Fantasy Grounds. So let me see if this will work. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this data, and I'm going to bring up Fantasy Grounds. And I do have at least the SRD loaded, so let me check the library here. So I'm going to go to modules and see what I have. Yeah, I actually have the SRD loaded and some map packs and stuff. So it should be able to help parse that information. That's why I have those loaded. You probably don't even have to, but it's helpful when you have some kind of context for Fantasy Grounds to work with, especially if you're using spells and such. Now what I'm going to do is go to the campaign and go to races. and this is the character creation, so I actually go into characters part. Here are the races. I'm going to create, first I'm going to create my own category. This is kind of a habit. So I made it's called group 1. I'm going to edit. And what I want to call this is, I'll just say OpenAI generated races in case. Just so I have a separation between what my other content is. Then I'm going to hit stop editing. And now I have my own group or my own category. So I'm going to open up the import text dialog, which is down here on the bottom. I'm going to bring up a pointer. You guys can see what I'm pointing at. That could be annoying. So let's get that. Anytime now. Huh, it kind of crashed on me, I guess. Let me try it again. The pointer focus, there it goes. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing is clicking on this import text. The import mode is something that can't be changed yet, but essentially I'm going to hit Control V, and it's going to give me all these different things. I think these double spaces might give it a little bit of problems, I don't know, but just to be on the safe side, I'm just going to take out this double space. I only need one. So let's see what it does. Let's see if this actually gives you what we want. So I'm going to hit import. Yeah, see, it didn't quite give me what I wanted because it has too much stuff. Yeah, see, it didn't quite import because of the way it's formatted. So what I'm going to do is take this information here and delete it. And then just, let's just put Oceanids. See if that helps. Because what happens is the parsing will not work correctly if this data is not to the standard. Let's see if that helps. Yeah, so here we go. So this is just the preliminary stuff, and then you just copy and paste the traits in, so that you can actually go in and build all your own traits, and you already have all the data here. So that's really cool that you can actually, it kind of cuts back on some of the work. I mean, it doesn't do everything, but it cuts back on the work. So that's one thing you can do with the AI, is kind of generate your own stuff. So let's try an NPC now. And I'm going to actually make basically an NPC out of that same data. So instead of having a player character race, we're going to create an NPC race that's based off of that. So here's the open AI section that I've already created. I'm going to open up the import text box dialog and then go back to the website. And I want to say, I'm coming right after this race thing that it made, is I'm going to say to generate an official, let's try that, an official NPC stat block based on the data above. And I'm going to actually get a little bit more specific. So generate an official NPC monster stat block based on the, I'll say generate an official D&D 5e NPC monster stat block. Fantasy Grounds, D&D 5e Fantasy Grounds NPC stat block based on the data above. And actually, if I say Fantasy Grounds, it might actually do the XML. So I'll try it without first. So I went ahead and took it out for now. We'll see what happens. So I'm going to hit generate, and we'll see what it does. I'm sorry, I'm unable to generate because I don't have access to the data you provided. Could you please see now? I asked it to take NPC data. Well, this is not NPC data. So what I'm going to do is reword this and just tell it to generate, because it's already trained enough to know what it means. So generate based on the official, I'll just say based on the data, let's see, NPC NPC based on the D&D 5e NPC data. We'll see if that works. I told it to grab from above, and it doesn't have enough information from it. See what it does. Yeah, see, it needs more information in order to start. So that's where you kind of get into, how you're wording this and what you're asking. So, for instance, this is already doing it this is another conversation just for NPC stat blocks. The other one was more of kind of a test run and a definition thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it write a stat block for an evil wanty serpent woman that has anthropomorphic humanoid features, a sorceress with reptile and snake features and traits using the official D&D Beyond monster stat block format. Also add a themed snake cult leader backstory with sinister goals and a vile attitude towards good folk. Also add in basic stat block notes for her summoned snake minions. So this is very complex. This is not a normal request. So I'm going to hit Control V, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the request button. Now you got to remember, I trained it to get to this point, so it's still it's growing, it's getting better, but it's writing the stat block out now. So we'll see if this becomes useful in Fantasy Grounds. It should, because it's formatting it correctly so far. So what you'll notice though is sometimes it'll use colons instead of periods for the traits and the actions. So you have to tell it not to do that, or it's gonna foul the importing. So it's already defining all the different spells, the damage immunities, and the damage and condition immunities. It's even adding in the snake minions that it might summon. So this is actually going to go into not the stat block, but see, now it only wrote some of the stat block because I need to include the actual actions. So I'm going to say, please rewrite the content above, but also include the NPC features and actions. So we'll see what happens here. So it's going to look at that. So now it's rewriting it. It's CR5, which is medium, humanoid, wanty, alignment evil, armor class 13, hit points 38, speeding of swimming and speed. It's putting the stats in there, the saving throws, the skills, the damage and condition immunities, has a passive perception of 14. It's giving the language. It's actually defining the spell casting. So they will give her the ability to cast spells. So it is taking data from the internet and from what the previous conversation and plugging that in. So it's actually creating a basic stat block. This will create something, but it's not exactly what I wanted. So I'm going to create, if you have an example of the type of thing. So here, for instance, is a stat block for the snake, the little minion. So it actually gives that information, and you can actually pull this in. So here's some of the traits for a pet snake. So I'm going to actually ask the AI to create an NPC stat block for the pet snake. So I'm going to say generate an official NPC stat block. Gotta see to make sure. Yeah, see, my typing really sucks, but an official D&D 5e stat block for a large snake guardian or something like that. Generate an official D&D 5e NPC monster stat block. So you got to kind of, define what exactly you're looking for. So this will be the Snake Guardian, and it'll probably generate the right one, so we'll see what it does. But as you do this more and more, you start realizing, the kind of questions. Yep, more chat. Yep, you got that right. Guys, this is RCG 0. He was the one that introduced us to this, so he's in the chat right now. But essentially, I'm having it create the snake minion. It looks like it's doing good. It's got all the bite, the constriction. It's got all the stats. It's got the immunity to poisons, and it even talks about a little bit about a backstory for it. So that's pretty interesting. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste some of this into Fantasy Grounds. And it stopped right here. I want to make sure that if it's got anything else, so I'm going to hit continue just in case. I don't know if it stopped at a good point or not. Nope, it's done. So I wanted to make sure it was done writing. So once I have that information, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this into Fantasy Grounds. So here's the control copy. It isn't using, it's using the data set, right? But initially it was the internet, so it's not using live data. At least not much of it. So here we're going to paste, it has to train the model. So I just pasted this data in here, but I need to get rid of the backstory. It says Guardian, okay. So what we'll do is create this backstory, and we'll put it over here on the right because that's for the actual lore. And what it's doing here is it's actually putting colons in here. So we don't want colons, we want periods for these actual stat block or traits. Because if you don't, it's not going to parse it correctly. So that's one thing that we had discovered yesterday is that we need to make sure that those are periods and not just semicolons, because you can actually ask it to write that without the semicolons. So let me right click and click the wand. That kind of helps take the spaces out. It kind of does it automatically, but I want to make sure. Okay, so that's all the information. I don't need this name, I don't think, up here. I think that's a fluke. Okay, so there's the data, import. Yep. So it kind of worked, but you can see it didn't get the stats because the formatting wasn't correct. So you got to be careful when you're using that data that it's actually in the correct format. So one of the things you can do is give it a good example or some sort of information so it can remember that conversation and help you with that. So it can do it. It's just now what I would do here is I would take this information and have it do a stat block. So what I'm going to do now is ask it, I'm going to say create or generate a random NPC. I always get that. D&D 5e. I want to say official. D&D Beyond, because I know that parser works for that. D&D Beyond stat block for, let's see, generate a random official D&D Beyond stat block for a serpent themed creature. So I want to kind of theme it for the biome or whatever the background is. So I'm going to ask it to generate a random official D&D stat block. So generate a random official, I'm going to say generate a, instead of random, I'm going to say an official, because it might do some weird stuff. Generate an official D&D Beyond generate an NPC. Generate an official D&D Beyond monster stat block for a serpent-themed creature. But if it does that, it's going to include the colons. I'm going to say, do not use colons. So you do not use colons for the traits, features, and actions. Because if you do, it'll mess it up because it won't parse correctly. So do not use that for that, and change the word serpent. It helps if you spell better. So do not use those, and then we'll say comma, use a period instead. Separator. See what it does. So you can play around with this until you get something. So here's something it's called a venomous guardian, the large beast, unaligned, armor class 14. It's got about 50 hit points. It can sit, it can swim, it can all that stuff. It's putting in. Oh, I see. It's not. Yeah, so it's still putting in the colon. So what you'll have to do is train it so that it will recognize not to do that. And there's good examples of stat blocks all over the place. So you can give it a stat block and it will take that and you can generate off of that. So this is a good time to develop. When the beginning part of it, you develop a template, as Zero had taught us before, is you can actually put in a template of what you want and it will actually generate it. Sometimes it goes off in tangents, so it'll just do whatever it wants, or at least what you tell it to do. So for instance, here are some more things where it's actually in code format. So this is actually another thing that this program can do. And it can actually do XML too. So if you take a stat block and you want to generate the XML for it, you can. So I can take something like this and I asked it to rewrite the above stat block in the official Monsters of the Multiverse NPC stat block format, followed by a short random fantasy story notes mentioned above. So I was taking and kind of expanding off of what it was already giving me. So it does quite a bit of stuff. I mean, I even asked it to create this CR bonus table. It did that. I asked it if it knew what the Dragonlance campaign setting, the different types of Draconians. It listed it all here for me. I mean, it does quite a bit of stuff. I mean, it's crazy. But so this also will give backstories if you want. I generated some traps. So this is something that you can use. But I said it generated like this. This is kind of the shorthand way of doing it, or like the text way. But then I said rewrite the stat block using the official stat block format and use basic piercing attack hazard. So this is the actual stat block format. Let me see if this parses into Fantasy Ground. Yeah, so this has the periods. So it's probably going to work. So I'll hit Control Copy, and then I'll go into the Fantasy Grounds itself. Bring up another instance or another version, hit Control V. So this is a right click and just click the wand to kind of see what it's going to look like when it pulls it in. Yeah, so it looks right. So I'll go ahead and import it. Yeah, so it made this trap. It's a wooden stakes pitfall trap. It created all the effects, the trigger, the actions. And then on the back, Fantasy Grounds nicely will put in the data, nice format once you import it with this tool. So it works pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty neat. You can do some stuff, but you just have to know how to ask it. And that's one thing that Zero went over with me. He made that very clear that you actually have to tell it what you want, and you have to define some of the parameters. So if you don't give it a good example, it's not going to give you good data. So you have to give it like a template of kind of what you're looking for, and then you can build off that. And that's really what this tool is very powerful. And it remembers your conversations. So sometimes when your conversation gets too complex, it starts pulling in data that you don't want. And that's when you start a new conversation. So you can also create tables. So I did it so it does a 5-room adventure. So if you wanted to, I can do something like that. So I'll say to write a 5-room adventure template, and it'll do that. So I'm going to say generate a 5-area one-shot. Oops. Generate a D&D 5e. You can tell it whatever rule set. I'll say generate a D&D 5 or D&D 5e one shot. I wanted a 5-area D&D one shot in the Forgotten Realms. Let's see, in the Forgotten Realms setting, something like that. And we can say, even if you want to, you can say Waterdeep or whatever. So we're going to generate a 5-area D&D one-shot adventure in the Forgotten Realms setting with a word count of, I'll say 10,000. It sounds like a lot, but it's really not. So that's the word count. Now, if you go above 20,000, it'll time out on you. And you got to be careful because they don't want you hogging up the bandwidth with big stories. So you got to be careful. I might just take away the word count because I don't want it to time out. So I'll just leave it, let it decide itself how it's going to do it. So generate a 5-area D&D 5e one-shot adventure in the Forgotten Realms setting. That's going to give me 5 areas and kind of write a little basic outline. So area A1, the adventure begins in a small village of Greenest, located in the rolling hills of Sword Coast. The village is under attack by a group of dragon cultists. So this is obviously based on the previous content. But room number 1, as they make their way through the village, they come across a group of dragon cultists. So it's kind of... it looks like it's borrowing from an adventure. I think it's the Rise of Tiamat. But essentially, it is a little different, but it can actually write content. But it's only taking off of what it's come across in the model that it's being used. So, yeah. So it says as they end at the near end of their journey, the adventurers come across the leader of a dragon cultist, a powerful, and it cuts itself off. So you have to hit continue, and it will write the rest of it. So if it stops on you, just write continue, and it will actually pick up where it left off. So this is something that will help you with your writing, doing research, all those sort of things. So this is a good thing for making content. I wouldn't expect it to write an entire essay, but it does a pretty good job. Now, you could actually take this information above and you could ask it to write it in XML format. So if you wanted to do, if you wanted to write this into Fantasy Grounds XML format, you could do that. So I'm going to say rewrite the content above into the official fantasy, if there is such a thing, Fantasy Grounds XML format. So if you're someone who writes extensions, that sort of thing, it might help you with that. It actually can fix code if you don't write it. Can you do something? Yeah, we can, totally. So I already have. So official Fantasy Grounds. Let's see. Fantasy Grounds XML format. So if I hit enter, it should write this in more. I'm sorry, but I'm able to write the. Oh, okay. So it doesn't know the context of it, but it does give you. Yeah, so it can do it. It's just a matter of I didn't ask it the right thing, and this particular conversation hasn't been trained on the XML format. So it will give you a list data though. So it tries. So yeah, I'll do something for Traveler. So you just ask me what you want it to create, and I'll do it. So go ahead and type it out in chat, and then I'll ask it to make that content. So I'm going to switch over to the conversation that has more to do with Traveler 2. And I'd like you to ask it kind of a semi-basic, maybe even a something, whatever you want. So ask it to, Patrick, if you're still there, ask it to generate something for you for the Traveler 2 rule set. It probably knows some of it. So go ahead and just put that in the text, and then I'll try to get it to do that. So if you want it to create something for you specific, you have to kind of define it. In this conversation, I've already done some things, like I asked it questions about what it is. So yeah, put in something, ask it something, whatever you want it to do, and I'll try to get it to generate it. We'll see if it gives us anything useful, because sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on what you're asking and how much it knows from the model that it's based on. So Evertoaster's right. It isn't using the internet. It's using a snapshot of the internet from 2021 on back. So it's not going to know anything new unless someone's crept that in. There is a little bit of new stuff that they add, but it's nothing. Not a whole database like it has now. So anything from 2021 back, it'll know stuff like that. So any new content that's just come out, it's not going to know that stuff. It might know it, but it doesn't know enough. So if you want to train it on something, give me a prompt or something that you want to create for the Mongoose Traveler content for Fantasy Grounds or for whatever you're doing. It'd be homebrew stuff. But what I did is I've given it, I made a D66 table kind of thing. It didn't quite give me what I wanted, but it did come out with some interesting things. I would say that what I'm going to do is, do you know? I asked it, do you know what the ship options are for the Traveler? I actually misspelled ship as shop. Okay, do you know what the main shipbuilding options are in Traveler 2E Highguard? In the Traveler 2E Highguard supplement are? I asked it that because I wanted to know if it actually knows what's in there. It kind of does. So it gives you, kind of what it draws upon. So Traveler, yeah, it says it includes rules for designing and building starships as well as rules for using them in gameplay. Here are some of the main options. So hull types, drive systems, life support systems. And so it kind of knows what goes into creating a custom ship. And I think this is one of the holy grails here of Traveler 2 because I'd see a lot of people have fun with it, but they're always asking about ship-to-ship combat, and they're always asking about creating this content in Fantasy Grounds. I think this might help with it. So these are just a few examples of it. So I'm going to ask it to generate an NPC. I'll say NPC vehicle. I'll just say a Traveler 2E spaceship using the official Traveler 2E rule set for Fantasy Grounds. We'll see if that actually works. So we'll see. All right, so generate a Traveler 2E spaceship using the official Traveler 2E rule set for Fantasy Grounds. So we'll see what it does. Oh, he's sorry, he doesn't know. So essentially, it's not able to do it for Fantasy Grounds. However, I can provide you with some general information about the process. So it's basically giving me information about kind of how to do it within the rule set. So what I can do is ask it to do like a stat block or something, because I haven't defined it yet. I haven't given it, any good information that it can use for that particular rule set. But then, it just depends on what you give it. So earlier in the evening, I asked, who was that? Mad Beard Man, to give me some context as to the formatting or the actual content. Yeah, so this is just let's see. So what I'm going to do is go to the conversation that I had with Mad Beard Man and see if I can get on here. Yep. So I'm going to take the text that he gave me for a ship. So, and what it is the basically the random ship. So let me do that. So I gave it a lot of kind of a lot of different examples, and then it gave me back some stuff that so here is an NPC marsh hunter. So this is something that that might be useful in a campaign if you're creating content. So give it the HTML or the XML in this case. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask it to please translate the data above into regular English terms, because this data here doesn't really do us much good in real life terms. So this is the Fantasy Grounds kind of stuff, and this is just an example of the data. So I'm going to say English terms. Okay, into regular English terms. So I'm going to ask it to take that information. So now it's going to explain it to me. It's going to say, yeah, so this is what it is. This is how it works. It's going to actually give me the breakdown of what this information means. So it can take the code and translate it into layman's terms. And then, I can actually have it create another stat block. Instead of this marsh hunter, I can have it build something else. So I don't know if it's done yet, so I'm going to hit continue. Yep, so there's nothing else to translate. Okay, so I want to take this stat block and I'm going to call this a template. So, and at the top of this, I'm going to name this, it doesn't matter where you put it, but I'm going to put it up there for organizational reasons. So I want to put Traveler 2E XML NPC template. And then below, where I want to ask it to do something, I'm going to say generate an NPC using the data above. So I can say, actually I'll say the data above is a template. Can you generate an NPC using the data above for the Traveler 2E rule set? Question mark. Okay, so I'm going to ask it to create something else based off this data above. We'll see what it does. I'm sorry, but unable to generate the ones provided. I am officially do not have the ability to generate. Yeah, it's because I'm not asking it the right questions. But essentially, if you put in the correct data, it'll give you the output that you want. So this is just a. So now I'm going to ask it just to generate. Just a stat block. Yeah, see, it's not able to do it because it's not trained to do that specific task. So it just really depends on what you ask it, how you ask it, and how you've trained it. So it takes a while to kind of get to where you want to go, but it is doable. I've done it. I've got examples of other things that I've done with this to where it'll actually do the coding. Like this is all XML for Fantasy Grounds. So this is some of the coding that it did before. This is a different conversation, and it's actually been trained to do this. So let me see what other questions I was asking it. So it says, can you please create a Traveler 2E formatted D66 player quirks table? And it actually made that. Let's see what else it can do. Let's see, how did it do that? Okay, so can you please, okay, so it says take the stat block above and write it into, okay, so using the data above, can you please write a standard Traveler NPC stat block into a format for an alien-like creature? So I actually had to take this item, which is a gazelle, and that's essentially what it has. So I'll take and copy and paste that as my template. And then what I'm going to do is ask it the question. I'm going to say, can you take this and make this out of it? So I want to make sure I grab the right stuff. So using the data above, can you please generate a standard Traveler 2E NPC stat block? So I'm going to put that underneath this example. So I'm going to hit Shift, Control V. I'm going to take out the quotes. I don't think it needs that. And let's see what it does. So it has the, the example above it. Okay, so here's a stat block for an alien creature. So it's going to create the Aslan alien out of the example from the gazelle above. So it's actually taking it and translating it and actually building it into, a basic story form stat block. It even talks about the token, the TL, wounds, the actions that it has. It has a laser pistol. Let me see if there's any more. I don't think so, but I want to make sure. Actually, I want to have it rewrite it in XML. Can you convert the data above into XML? Yeah, so it can put all this in the XML format for you if that's what you choose to do. So you can do quite a bit. So once you train the bot, it will understand what you're asking it, and it will be able to put out useful information. So some of the examples I gave you earlier were not developed enough, or I was trying to ask it something it hasn't come across yet. So this is some of the things that you're going to go through when you first start using this OpenAI ChatGPT. Just remember that it's stuck in 2021 and beyond, behind that. And also, don't ask it for national security secrets because they've already they're on that. They had people trying to take it and write vulnerability code to get around bank software security and such like that. So they've already kind of put the kibosh on that. So you're not going to get that kind of stuff. But just try to train it, work with it, kind of get some familiarity. I don't think it costs anything right now. They're still kind of in beta. I imagine they'll put some kind of price on it. It's definitely worth checking out. It's not perfect, and it's really dumb, but it's super smart. So the dumb part is not knowing how to ask it, and that's really what you have to do is define how you're asking the questions, and then ask the questions, and then be kind of consistent. And sometimes you can experiment with it and say, okay, I want it to do this instead of that. You can do that. You can actually ask it to rewrite things and put in the parameters that you write or don't write. This also has an Android app, so if you're sitting at the doctor's office waiting for your appointment, this would be a cool little thing to do while you're waiting, because you can generate all kinds of stuff. And like I made a dungeon generator, an NPC template thing. It just it just really makes it interesting. I think when Zero first started this project, he wanted to essentially just create random NPCs for his games. But as he used the product more and more, he realized that there's more potential. And like I said, if you keep it simple, it makes it easier to use. But if you keep adding more complications to it, then it gets harder to use because it gives you too much information or the wrong information. So my advice is to kind of just keep it on subject, and first just kind of play with it, and then make these topics, which is a new chat window, and then you can just kind of like use one for templates, use one for our NPCs, use one for your storytelling template, so all that sort of stuff. Keep it compartmentalized, and that will really help. And then if you get tired of all these conversations, you can hit clear conversations, but if you've already trained it with one of these conversations, you don't want to clear all of them. So you can actually delete some of these manually. You can just hover over. And if, like, for instance, I'm on this D&D 5e stat block kick here. So if I wanted to, I could take this and delete this if I wanted to, or edit the title. So there's all kinds of things you can do here. But I noticed that it wants to constantly give these traits, these colons, so you have to train it not to do that. And then you want to give it like the Fantasy Grounds. That's why I made a Fantasy Grounds NPC template, because it actually creates the content more in the Fantasy Grounds format, and it kind of makes it so that it doesn't make as many mistakes, and it actually gives you the content you want. But see here, the Sand Folk, it's using the colons, which I don't want. I want that period. So you can ask it to substitute out stuff like that and rewrite it if you're not happy with the output, because I know that's going to trip up the parsing tool. So here it's still using the colons, and then as it gets further on, though, I'm able to tell it, hey, don't do this, don't do that. And it actually starts to figure out like what formatting you want, based off of your request, based off your previous conversations with it. So this one I put, write an NPC monster stat block using the official Monsters of the Multiverse NPC stat block format, and write with a spider folk queen with giant spider features and traits. Also include a backstory for a paranoid and desperate spider folk queen. So I use that as my prompt, and it already kind of knows the parameters. So I'm going to see if it'll do it again. Yeah, so I just ask it the same question. It's going to generate something slightly different. I didn't ask it for the exact same copy of it, but essentially it's putting out the stat block here, and also some of the features. And what I'm noticing, see, it's still doing the claw. It's got the colons and such. So you can actually go in and have it rewrite it, but just say for actions and for traits and features, don't use the the colons or the semicolon. So that's why it didn't work last time, because I said colon instead of semicolon. So these are what some of the things that you'll learn. And here's the backstory. So it's got a pretty good handle on how, and then I actually have to hit continue because it's not finished writing, but it kind of times out, so it helps protect the integrity of the server. So yeah. So anyways, that's I think it's done. It says please provide more information. Okay, I'm not going to worry about that. So essentially, it can do it, and I'll say if you wanted to, you can ask it to get rid of these. The main thing is you don't want it to say, like for the byte here, you actually want the period, not the semicolons. Because when you go to paste that into Fantasy Grounds, it's not going to parse it correctly. It needs to have this period format. So if you take this data here and you copy and paste this, because this is the correct format, and then you use this as your basis. So what I want to do is hit Control V. I'm copying that data from Fantasy Grounds. And now I'm going to hit Shift and Enter to go to the next line. And I'm going to say, can you generate an NPC trap based on the data and format above? And I'll say random this time. So can you generate a random based off the data and format above? I'll say a random D&D 5e, just in case. Okay, so see what it does. Yep, here's an exploding pitfall trap. So before it was just a wooden stakes thing, and now it's given me the exploding pitfall trap. So it gives you the trigger, the effect, and it's writing it with the period instead of the semicolon. And so the actions are correct. So this is cool. So you can generate good things if you have a good template. And you use the same template over and over if you want, but eventually it's going to know, you can just say create a trap, NPC trap. But for the time being, I'll just keep using the same format. So then what you could do is you could say, okay, take this and paste it into another conversation and ask it to create it in XML format. So I'm going to take this information here, hit Control Copy, go to my XML conversation, and I'm going to paste this in here, and then I'm going to ask it, can you convert the data above into an official Fantasy Grounds XML format? We'll see if it can handle that. It may not know the parameter for Fantasy Grounds XML. It depends on what you've trained it to and what its understanding is. But there should be code online that it took when they actually trained the model. So we'll see what happens. So we're going to hit that, see what it does. Certainly, here it is. Oh yeah, so here's all the XML. It's starting to write that code. So if you needed to put this in and develop Fantasy Grounds from an XML standpoint, you could do that instead of using the interface. It might be faster for people who understand how to use XML data. So there's other ways to skin a cat. So this would be another way if you know the back end of Fantasy Grounds pretty well. You can do it this way, and it would help speed things up. I mean, it's not going to write everything for you, but it gives you the template, saves you a lot of typing, that sort of thing. So you notice I put this in a separate conversation because I don't want to convolute my other examples with that sort of data, because what it'll do is when you ask it to do something, it's going to include that, or it's going to mix and match the results, and I don't want it to do that. So it can actually kind of make things worse if you add too much stuff to the conversation. So try to keep your conversations kind of compartmentalized. That will help you keep your data more in sync with what you're wanting. So have a conversation for tables, have one for NPCs, have one for XML code, have one for story generation. That's my suggestion. I mean, you can put it all in one conversation if you want, but what I found is that when you ask it questions, if you're not very specific, it's going to give you a bunch of stuff that you don't want. So that's really what you're trying to avoid, that, because then you have to do it over. So then you have to say, well, don't do this and don't do that and don't do this. And what it's doing is it's pulling from your previous conversation. So you got to remember that. So try to keep the conversation on topic, is what I'm saying. I think that's enough to kind of get you started, but it really will help you write, research, make content, that sort of thing. Don't ask it for national security secrets, because it's hip to that. And I noticed that if you abuse the length or how many lines it's going to generate, it'll get mad at you. It'll time out, or it'll tell you you're out of time and you have to wait an hour or something like that. So if you feed it a whole bunch of data, and it's not going to take it. And if you try to ask it to write too much data at once, it won't take that very well either. It'll do it, but it will kind of be slow. It'll break it up into 3 pieces, and it's not designed for writing stories. This was designed for dialogue and for chat. So it wasn't really designed for creating giant whopping stories and that sort of thing. So keep it simple, small, compartmentalize, and it'll be a great tool for you. I'm sure you'll find some other uses for it outside of Fantasy Grounds. And again, the descriptions will be at the end of the video. The links and stuff will be in there. And I want to thank Zero again for introducing me to this technology. I knew it existed, I just didn't know how it worked or how it was going to apply to Fantasy Grounds. So there you go. So I think that's enough for AI generation, and hopefully this helps you out. And I'll see you next time, folks. Bye-bye.